Welcome to another edition of Tops. It's Friday afternoon. I'm here with Marc Harty. I'm Bill Davis, and we're going to get going on what we think should be a really cool topic today, and that's controversy. And some other synonyms or things that are parallel to that are, news, tabloid, just stuff that gets people's attention, that people are interested in, and how you can tie those things into your own marketing messages or your own publications. So I'm going to let Marc start off because he has a lot of really good stuff to talk about.
Well, to be controversial, I got nothing.
I was waiting for that. So
okay, well, it's Friday. We get to be a little bit loose on Friday. I have my Movember hangover that and I'm like, hey, it's Friday. What can I say? So controversy. It is a double-edged sword. On one edge, you have a lot more exposure, a lot more engagement. You don't have to necessarily make news. You're really kind of riding on a wave of news. Hypocritical, or it comes across as being superficial. So you really, I guess it's kind of like you're taking a medication. There are side effects. There are directions, and you need to be weary of both. And I can get into some specific examples, but I just wanted to kind of set that frame as we kind of dig deeper into controversy.
Cool. Yeah, I can't point to any specific examples of where it all went wrong because I repress those memories. But I'm sure I've done my share of, oh, that didn't work, or oh my God, what did I just do? But yeah.
I have an amazing story about controversy that actually succeeded in both edges of the sword. So I can either share that with you now, or I can save that as reward for people watching this, to its entirety. Bill, I will let you decide.
Let's save it for a little bit later. But I want to get into some of the topics that you brought up, during the pre-show that nobody else got to see. But you've done a lot of public relations work. You've done. There's a term out there that maybe not a lot of people are aware of, but it's called newsjacking, and maybe you can touch on that as well. And then maybe you could touch on some. Maybe you have some examples to share that worked, and that at the end we can talk about the ones that kind of either didn't work or worked both edges of the sword, so to speak.
Okay. All right. Well, I will save the big case study for the end. But yeah, so newsjacking is you're basically, comes obviously a derivative of the word hijacking. You're taking a news story and you're hijacking it. You're hijacking it for a positive end. In fact, I actually wrote a special report on newsjacking, and I did a lot of research. And so, I can, these aren't necessarily my examples, but they're examples that I kind of curated. So for example, this is going back a few years. There were these miners that were, stuck, and there was this furious rescue to rescue the miners. And, the good news is that they were rescued. Now, a savvy company called Oakley, who just happens to make sunglasses, said, wouldn't it be a nice gift as these guys who've been, underground for 20 days, if they have our top of the line sunglass for when they come out. And so that's what Oakley did. They donated sunglasses. And, what did it cost them? A few $1,000s. They literally got millions of dollars worth of publicity. Now, if somebody else tried to do that, but it wasn't sincere, it's like, but it was a natural fit. And so you remember, when I went back to the beginning, is it, can you connect the dots? Did it make sense? Conversely, there was another, and I forget the name of the manufacturer, but it's in my guide. I read the guide like 7 years ago. There was a flood, and it was this designer shoe company, and they made some kind of flippant joke about, well, if you had these kind of boots, you'd be better off, in the flood. So, it came across as some kind of transparent sales pitch, and they got slammed. And rightly so, because somebody was on social media, probably thought, hey, this would be funny, didn't think it through. So not only did they not get any business, but they probably hurt themselves in terms of getting business because they, that Newsjack was not a good fit. So those are two, right off the top that I can think of. I have a couple more from my personal interaction, but I don't know if you have any comments before we get into those.
No, I think it's really interesting. The people who can do, newsjacking well are I find them, pretty interesting and talented. And I'm always looking for a good way to do that. I'm probably more subtle. I use topical current events in my marketing messages, but I really try not to be too controversial. But maybe I should try. It sounds like a challenge.
Well, I mean, what we're doing here, at least in part, is kind of giving you a recipe. If you are going to do it, here's some things to keep in mind. So yeah, I mean, you want me to share a couple more examples?
Yeah, I love these.
Okay, so this is actually twofold. I was working with a client. He's an attorney. And he was working with one of his clients, actually a good friend, guy, I think, who stood up at his wedding. And he had a chain of, it was basically like convenience stores, like 7-Elevens, but it was his own brand, and it was local to Missouri. And there were some, without getting too deep into the weeds, there were some kind of political things that, some legislation, some taxes, and some things that were going to hurt his industry. So we decided, they hired my company, and it's like, we just want to bring this stuff to light because there's some hypocrisy here. There's some hypocrisy going on in state government. So the first thing was you got to come up with a name for the website, and so I came up with probably 100 domain names, and I threw a couple in that were literally jokes. I mean, I did it to just kind of amuse myself. When I do these projects, I like to kind of think outside the box, and they picked one of those. Yeah. It was statesonthetake.com. Right. Sounds pretty controversial, that. Yeah. You're not kind of saying, hey, there's good states. And this attorney, who is very savvy, was able to get his hands on some documents that were shared with attorneys general from around the U.S. And we created this this site where people could only view these documents, these controversial documents, if we approved them. And at looking at the metrics, just so happened 38 out of the 50 states attorneys general actually logged in.
Wow.
But and then what we did is we did press releases that would kind of put more of the pressure on. So how does this fit into controversy? Well, it fits into controversy because we could have taken a very positive approach, and we could say this is wrong. These small businesses are being unfairly taxed and stuff, and we decided to kind of go for the jugular. But states on the take, there's a little bit of whimsy in that. It's not completely hardcore, scorched earth kind of marketing, but it worked. And I will tell you one other thing, which is an unintended benefit. So this attorney was writing blog posts and doing press releases. The press releases got the attention of a think tank. this think tank specialized in state government issues. And they're like, why is his press releases, he's just a solo attorney, why are his press releases ranking higher than our press releases? Well, he hired me, that was one reason. But the end of the story is there was a direct financial outcome because this think tank hired him for $3,000 a month to write blog posts, and he had that gig for 3 years. So he made literally six figures on the side, in addition to what his client was already paying him. And I gotta say, if it wasn't controversy, I don't know if all those stars would have aligned. So there you go.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And I like how you threw in, some phony, goofy domain names, and they picked one. That's awesome.
They do. Clients can surprise you sometimes.
Yeah, I can't remember the specific example, but I think I want to say some company in England reached out to, their fans or customers or whatever, and asked them to name a boat or something. And these people came up with like Floaty McFloaty,
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
Stuff like that. And it was just hilarious. That's kind of stuff I would do, but I wouldn't I don't know if I'd be ballsy enough to do that with an actual client. But I would do that, to my friends or family or Facebook or whatever. That would be hilarious. So when you're talking about the term or the practice of newsjacking, can you kind of walk us through what your process is? Do you like scan the daily news and say, that's interesting, how am I going to tie this into something? Or how does that work?
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you asked that. And I think part of it is obviously being timely, and you're not going to be timely being in your little cocoon or your cave. So you do have to kind of search. Google Trends, Google Insights. If you have set up certain readers, so you get like articles on a daily basis. That's a good foundation. And then sometimes I just scan. I scan for stuff that I find particularly interesting, or maybe I think is really kind of hasn't reached like the tipping point in terms of exposure. It's still on the way up. And I'm figuring, hey, maybe I can get in there and it hasn't peaked already, and I can kind of ride that wave. And, it's not an exact science. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But it's worth being mindful of, because like I said, when you do get that opportunity, and I'll still share the big case study, before we close today, it really, really makes a difference. And the ROI on it, you can't really compare it to anything else.
Wow. Yeah. So, you mentioned a few resources. Another one that I like to use for just topical, news, not necessarily controversy, but just tying news in with, everyday news in with whatever you're doing, is Google News. I find it to be really interesting. And I look at Google News a couple times a day, usually once in the morning and once in the afternoon. It doesn't change much. They are updating stuff, but the news of the day seems to be like the news of the day. It seems like nothing pops at, noon. It's a good resource for me to find out kind of what's going on in the world, because I don't watch a lot of TV and I don't get a newspaper. What's that?
Just a quick comment. There's two stages of news, and you've seen this if you've watched cable news. Although the two stages are kind of compressing. The first is it's news, and literally they're just reporting it. The second stage is they've had some time and now they're analyzing it. And sometimes that happens at the same time, but sometimes the news doesn't come out all at once. It comes out in bits and pieces. And as a result, there are some people that actually, in the media hold off on the full analysis because they don't feel like they've got the whole story. And if they jump in and say, well, we think blank, and it turns out this other news comes out and it makes them, take an opposite position, then they'll look like idiots. So, but just kind of be mindful of there's the news, and when we say news, it could be a current event. It could be, any number of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be, the most obvious examples, politics, entertainment. It could be anything. It could be, a business coming out with a new technology. Could be something with sports. It could be, the like a heartwarming feel-good story, about human kindness. There's that story. I'm not saying anybody newsjacked it, but it did go viral. It was that story of a woman who ran out of gas, and the homeless guy who only had $20 to his name gave her the $20 for gas. Did you hear about this, Bill?
No.
Okay, so she gets gas. Her husband, comes pick up. They're like, so grateful to this guy. They set up a GoFundMe page. This was like a week ago. It was about $350,000 for donations to this homeless guy, and it could be, I don't know if they pulled it. I mean, I think they pulled it down a couple times because the homeless guy was like, "Hey, I don't want to send the wrong idea that I'm just trying to cash in on this."
Yeah.
But it was one of those things that was just such a dramatic example of the right side of humanity, people reaching out and saying, hey, this is what happens when you pay it forward. So, I mean, you could have, newsjacked about something like that, for example.
Very cool. No, I hadn't heard that story. That's pretty cool. I think we should all just set up GoFundMe campaigns and make up a story and see what happens. All right, cool. Well, I think you should. I think it's time to share with us, the big story.
Okay. All right. Well, do know that there's a lot more to talk about with controversy. There's a lot more to talk about with newsjacking. So we really gave you kind of just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
But we wanted to get you excited. We wanted to get you excited about what's possible and how, a lot of times, the dots get connected, the stars get aligned, and you have this amazing success. So this goes back a few years. This goes back to when I was working for an ad agency. And we were doing some pro bono work. Pro bono means we don't charge and typically you do pro bono work for nonprofits. In this case, it was the Cincinnati Opera. Cincinnati is in Ohio. Cincinnati is a kind of a conservative community. They once had a very livid art exhibit with certain provocative photos, and the police arrested the director of the art museum. So Cincinnati always has had kind of a conservative nature. So Cincinnati Opera, Bill, have you ever been to an opera? Do you know kind of like the main operas? Okay, so I mean, there's, for example, there's the old standbys, La Boheme. There's Don Giovanni. So this one was a kind of a, by more recent kind of, by traditional standards, a more recent opera. And it was based on an evangelist, a lustful evangelist. So at the time, I'm looking around and I'm just doing a radio commercial, okay? I'm not doing anything else. I'm not doing a press release. I'm not doing an ad. I'm just doing a radio commercial. So I'm looking around and he's still out there. I mean, this is going back a few years. Jimmy Swaggart, one of these evangelists, was caught with a prostitute.
Yeah.
And
I remember the prostitute more than I remember him.
So I made the judgment call, and it was approved by, at that time I was just a writer. It was approved by my superiors that I was going to take a clip from Jimmy Swaggart's confession. He confessed on air, and it was just a one sentence thing, and it was so that began the radio commercial. So it was something along the lines, forgive me, God, for I have sinned, and whatever. And then the voiceover comes in and says, lustful evangelists have been getting a lot of news lately. Well, if you want to see a really lustful evangelist, and I go into this whole, and there were some funny bits. It's like, it's probably the only opera ever written that takes place in Tennessee. just goofy stuff. So typically, when you do a pro bono radio spot, these run when everybody is sleeping, because it's free time. So it's going to probably run at 2 in the morning. Maybe some people hear it that are insomniacs, but that's basically it. Well, the local newspaper got wind of this and wrote a story about it. And then the story, because this was at the time, the newspaper was owned by Scripps Howard, who had a lot of newspapers. They put it out on the wire, and it ends up showing up in all these other newspapers. And
this was specifically about your radio spot.
Yeah, a local radio spot for the Cincinnati Opera. Okay. So now it's appearing on local, in newspapers around the country. Yep. So Swagger gets a hold of it, and he's furious. His attorney calls up, and we were saying, like, okay, we used his voice. We didn't identify and say this was him. We didn't show his photo or anything like that. So while that's going on, the Newsjack is continuing to snowball. So Entertainment Tonight does a special on it. But wait, there's more. The Washington Post writes an editorial. Can you copyright a confession? So they're looking at the legal angle of, all this. So meanwhile, I'm looking through the filter of Cincinnati, very conservative. Typically the board of directors for the opera is going to be local people. They're going to be, beside themselves, and our client's probably going to get fired. So I find out that the board was expecting to get a total loss on this opera. They had projected to lose money. Well, guess what? Controversy sells. The opera is sold out. The opera director is like, yeah, there were some rough spots, but hey, we delivered, didn't we? So
that's awesome.
The net is, I think, what? I don't even know if the spot actually ran. I mean, maybe it did, but it didn't need to because it had generated all this other publicity. Now, did I take a risk? Certainly. But I didn't do haphazardly, and I'm not an attorney, but I did feel somewhat comfortable that, that Swagger was kind of in the public domain, and there was, maybe some nuances to that, but it fit. I mean, he was a lustful evangelist. The opera is about a lustful evangelist. So there was there was a fit. It wasn't like, hey, I was pulling something out of left field and tried to make a newsjack. So, I still have all the news clippings, all the, exposure. If you search online, you could probably find things in the archives. Just search Cincinnati Opera, Jimmy Swaggart. Last time I looked, about 2 or 3 months ago, I found like 4 articles.
Nice. That's very cool. That's a great story. I love that.
And one of these days, when we get our Facebook community up and running, I will post the actual commercial for our members. Those are, one of the little goodies you can expect. So you can actually hear how it all turned out.
I like it. I it's weird that you kind of used that story because I don't remember all the details because it was a long time ago.
It was.
But I do remember that story, and I remember it being a big deal. Like, oh my God, did you just see what happened? And contrast that with today, where that's all that happens. It's almost like no news is the best. It's no news is good news. It's like there's a race to the, I don't know if it's the top or the bottom, but in terms of controversy and scandalous type news, it's all out there. So I think there's going to be a lot of luck and talent involved in newsjacking today's stories versus back then, when there was less of it, but when it was a story, it was a real story. It stood out. Now it's like, how do you know which one's going to rise to the top, right? I mean, because anyway, that's a whole other topic. But I liked this topic, and I think we should look at it again from maybe a different angle and do another show on it. So thank you very much. I love those examples.
I mean, I'll close with with this is, controversy sells, and I'll do a political thing. I will say Trump has been really good for the economy in one respect, because I have not seen so many books written about a president within the first year of office. I mean, he has literally awakened a whole sector.
It's true.
It's
true. And that one last thing about, it's kind of like politics, but to me, it's demand and supply. But Obama was great for the gun industry. Mm-hmm. I used to sell at a sporting goods store. It wasn't like the only thing I sold, but it was, part of it was firearms and ammunition. And I remember whenever there was some kind of scare in the news or whatever, people would come in and buy that stuff more than they would at any other time. And when half the country thought, well, maybe it's not half the country, but a sizable portion of the country thought, oh my God, Obama's coming to get our guns, we better go buy them before they're gone. There were lines out the door after some of those shootings. It's crazy how and it's completely opposite of what you'd think. It's you'd think Obama would be bad for guns. No, he's actually good for guns. Trump good for books. He doesn't even read, but he's great for books. So good for authors. Way to go. It's a bumper crop this year. And I think it's the same next year. Anyway, on that note, I think I should go. Everybody have a good weekend, and we'll see you next Friday with another edition of Tops. So
bye, everybody.
Go to titansofpublishing.com, see what we got, sign up for our group. It's free. We share a lot of good stuff there. So talk to you next time. See you later, Mark.
Bye.
Bye.